Welcome, everyone, and welcome to my guest, Vince Mayfield. Vince is a CEO of Talking Parents, a high-growth consumer SaaS platform, and co-founder of BitWizards, a 5-time Inc. 5000 firm. He is a resilient entrepreneur, veteran, and Notre Dame MBA, and has scaled reoccurring revenue businesses through grit, vision, and leadership. And he is from Destin, Fort Walton Beach, Florida. So thank you, Vince, for being here.
Well, thank you, Alanna. I appreciate you having me here today.
Fantastic. So where I want to start is you had shared with me the inspiration to become an Air Force pilot. So just share with us a little bit about where that came from for you.
Well, I come from a military family. My father was an aircraft maintainer. He was an enlisted person in the Air Force, worked on Air Force fuel systems, and then rose all the way to become a chief master sergeant and ran an aircraft maintenance unit with over 200 personnel and 24 Air Force F-15s. So from the time I was little, about the time I was 6 or 7 years old, I knew I want to go into the military. I remember reading a book about George S. Patton as a general during World War II. I got it through the Reader's Book Club of the Month when I was in the first grade. And I went with my father one time down to the DRMO where they have excess military supplies, and I was able to get myself an old steel pot helmet and used to run around playing Army, crawling through the ditches here in Shalimar, Destin, Fort Walton Beach, Florida area, playing like I was playing war. But soon after, I sort of realized that I loved airplanes and I loved flying. I used to go with my father out to the base and used to go out to his squadron originally when they were working on F-4s, and some of the airmen would let me take panels off of the airplanes. And it was kind of around. And I realized that I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy and I wanted to fly fighters and I wanted to be a general one day. That was my goal.
Wonderful. So you had shared with me when we talked previously that although this was a consistent through line and inspiration for you, that you unfortunately had experienced some rejection and setbacks. And there was even a point where you actually lost a pilot slot because you were doing something very meaningful for someone in your family. So share with us about that.
Yeah, sure. As I mentioned, everything was about, going to fly and to go in the Air Force. So I was in ROTC, I was in Civil Air Patrol, I was in Boy Scouts, ultimately became an Eagle Scout, Carl A. Spots Award winner in Civil Air Patrol, Corps Commander in ROTC. And I applied for the Air Force Academy. And you got to remember, this was the Reagan years, 1980 through 84, because I graduated high school in 84. I'm an old fart. Um, and so I got a presidential nomination for the Air Force Academy, but I didn't get accepted into the academy. And by that time, I'd already learned how to fly. I started flying when I was 16. I soloed when I was 16. I had my private pilot's license when I was 17. And I got a prep scholarship for the Air Force Academy, and I went to a school called Marion Military Institute. And when I was there, they asked me if I wanted to join the Army Reserves. And so I went into the Army Reserves and went through basic training, and I went to Service Academy prep for a year. And I did well. I had good grades and good SAT and ACT scores, but there's a lot of people applying then, and I didn't get accepted then. Well, I had a guy that was my roommate at Marion, and his dad was a professor at Troy State University, and he told me about they had this phenomenal Air Force ROTC program there at Troy State, which was just down the road. And for me, I wasn't really worried about getting a degree or, trying to do well in school, that type of thing, other than it was a means to an end to be able to get into a cockpit and fly airplanes. So when I didn't get accepted to the Air Force Academy that second year, I went back home down to Florida and I started taking classes at Troy State, and I started applying to different ROTC programs. And it turned out that Troy State offered me a slot in the Air Force ROTC program, and they offered me a pilot slot. The only catch is that I had originally thought I was going to major in history or political science or something easy, because again, school wasn't important to me. All that was important to me was flying airplanes and leading people. And so they said, you have to major in something technical. And I said, well, what do you have? I said, you have an engineering program? And they said, no, Your choices are math, computer science, or physics. So I decided to major in math and do a minor in computer science and physics. And then later on, I decided to drop the physics and just do computer science and mathematics. I went through the Air Force ROTC program, was supposed to be commissioned a second lieutenant. I got chosen as one of 48 cadets in the nation to go to Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training. But my father had recently retired from the Air Force, and he was trying to get in civil service, and he moved over to Lake City, Florida, and my mom was at home, and my mom came down with breast cancer. And my other sister had moved out and was living up in Wisconsin, and my youngest sister was still in high school. Actually, she was in junior high school, about to start high school. And I was the closest one. So I was doing a lot of traveling back home and trying to do all the stuff I was doing in school. And ended up, I wasn't going to be able to graduate on time, and I got pushed into a different fiscal year, and I ended up losing my pilot slot. So that was kind of devastating for me. I ended up going on active duty and thought I was going to try to come back and go to either the Navy or go to the Army and fly airplanes if the Air Force wasn't going to let me fly planes. But that was that was 88 by that time frame, 88, 89, and that's when all the cutbacks were happening, after the Reagan years, and they were drawing down. And so I came back home after getting out of the service and went to work as a supervisor of flying at the Eglin Aero Club, where I could continue to build hours. And I remember my father wanted me to try to go fly for the airlines. And I had no interest in doing that. To me, that was like driving a bus. And so I wanted to fly jets. I wanted to go upside down. I wanted to shoot things down. That's what I wanted to do. And so here I am. I'm back at home. I decided to work on a master's degree. I'm getting a master's in international relations, thinking, that's going to be great as a military officer, and I'm going to go back and fly planes for either the Navy or the Army, or maybe the Air Force would open back up. And I remember I'd been going out drinking with a bunch of my buddies. I mean, I was working and doing my stuff, but here I am. I'm going to school. I'm living at home with my parents. I've got a 4-year degree in math and computer science. And I went out drinking one night, and I came home, and I was laying in bed. And about 6 o'clock in the morning, my chief master sergeant father had come home and basically kicked my bed and asked me, "What the fuck are you doing?" And I kind of looked at him and I said, "Well, I'm sleeping." And he said, "No, what the fuck are you doing with your life?" He
Yeah.
says, "You got a math degree, you got a computer science degree." I said, "Well, I'm waiting for the military to open back up and start flying." And my dad said, "Well," he said, "maybe God's trying to tell you to do something different. And maybe what you need to do is go out and get a real job and start doing something in your career, and quit waiting on these other things to happen." And so that was sort of the catalyst where I went out and I got a job working as a defense contractor, working in software development, and ended up getting to work on Air Force mission planning systems, which was a nice segue for me because at this time I'm a commercial instrument rated pilot. And so understanding flight planning systems and how they work, I got to help build the Air Force's flight planning systems that they use for their military pilots.
Yeah. So really quick, I just want to, touch on how these moments, like the one where you lost the pilot slot, and then, that took you on a different path in essence. I often say everything I've ever done and everything I've experienced is a contribution to who I am today and who I'm in the process of becoming. And we don't always know what path we're being guided to, kind of like what your dad was saying, is maybe God wants you to do something different. And, it's in that moment, I can only imagine what it was like to have your dad standing over your bed saying this to you. And it's in one respect, how old were you at that point?
I was 24,
Okay.
22, 24-ish, somewhere in that range. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know what you know about brain science, but our brain isn't fully developed, or the last part of our brain that gets connected is the prefrontal cortex, which has to do with decision making. And depending on what brain scientist you talk to, that part of our brain doesn't get fully connected until we're in our, in essence, mid 20s. And so that kind of makes sense, even though we practice making decisions all throughout growing up, even when we're, young, your brain was still either not connected or newly connected. And so decision making was kind of a really effective decision making in that way. And recognizing the impact that it was going to have on your life, that's next level. And so, having your dad, Sergeant, do something like that, and steering you in a different direction, was probably monumental for you.
It was. I think after all that went down, it took me a little while to kind of come to grip with it. I've never been one that let any obstacle stand in my way. As soon as there was something that was an obstacle, I figured out a way around it or how to get to the next point that I needed to be. I think some of the people around here at Talking Parents and Bitwizards get tired of me saying something like, make a decision, right? We can make mid-course adjustments and corrections as we go along, but analysis paralysis isn't going to help us, right? So we got to move, we got to move forward. I had a friend one time said, if you're not growing, if you're not moving, then you're dying.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of something that's been part of my life. But there was another catalyst that happened right around that same time. My mom had gone through chemo and radiation, but the cancer had come back. And one of the things I did when I got out of the Air Force and I came back, I bought myself a Mustang convertible, thinking, I'd been driving around an old beater. I had a '68 Mustang before that, and then a '81 Corolla that I drove around and had 600,000 miles on it. And so I came
Oh,
back and I bought this '91 Mustang, and I took my mom for a ride, and she wanted to talk to me, and I took her out to this drive-in that we had here. It's like think of it like a malt shop, but it's the old traditional, like a Sonic type thing, but it was called
yeah.
Cherries.
Yeah.
And so we were there, and we were having a milkshake, and we were talking, and she was, my dad had recently talked to me, kicked my bed and kind of gave me those words, and I was talking with my mom, and I said. Dad wants me to go find a job, and I'm not really sure. I'm working and I'm paying my way, but she says, yeah, but you're not moving yourself forward, and maybe you need to go in a different direction. And she said, I want to tell you something. She says, I never thought you were going to be in the service long term. She says, one day I thought you were going to be a business owner, and that you were going to own a business and be a very prominent business leader. And I laughed. I remember laughing. And I said, Mom, I have no interest in business, don't care about it, not interested in that. The military is where I want to be, what I want to do. Um, but because of my parents talking to me, I went out and started working in the civilian sector as a defense contractor. And I did that for roughly about 8, almost 10 years before my business partner and I, Lewis, started talking about forming Bitwizards. So, it took me a while. It was a journey back then trying to get over, where I thought I wanted to go and what I wanted to do and where was I going to be. And there was sort of a realization that sort of came over time. I kept making these mid-course corrections and doing something different, that my life was going in a total different direction. And if I wanted it to be outstanding, I needed to do some things differently. Um, you know, I think I realized that working for somebody else wasn't for me. I like to be in charge, and I like to be in charge of my destiny. And I believe through hard work and perseverance and grit that anybody can achieve anything here in the United States. And so I started looking at, where do I go and what do I do?
Well, and how nice that you had parents that saw more in you than what you saw in yourself at that time. And then, I don't know if you realize it, but you acknowledge something. It's very subtle, but it's really powerful about those pivots in life. Because, I'm in my 50s too. And when I hear people talk about their life journey, because I'm always curious, it also has a lot to do with the work that I do. Not all people don't always paying attention to those signals, the signs, or the inspiration, or somebody reflecting something back at you about yourself, and they see more for you than you might see for yourself. And those are choice points. Those are choice points that we have to make a decision to stay either where we are, stick with the status quo, maybe even live a little bit of a smaller life or smaller versions of ourselves, or to step into the unknown.
Yeah, I agree. I think, looking back on that time in my life, I mean, I was having fun. Don't get me wrong. I was a young single guy, and the places that I worked with, there were a lot of really cool people that I hung out and did stuff with. Um, but I'm also a very driven person. And so, if you look at some of the things that I did when I was younger, I mean, I was flying for Civil Patrol when I was younger and doing disaster relief exercises and helping search for downed airplanes, when I was 15, 16, 17 years old. So, there's a drive in me to do things. And, I look back on that 10 years where I was working in the defense industry as a software engineer. It was a great period because I learned a lot about software and I learned a lot about people, and I learned a lot about management and things like that. I had a good base growing up. Um, and you acknowledge something I think is really important. I had great parents, right? My parents came from very humble background. My grandparents are products of the Depression. My dad comes from a family of six. My mom comes from a family of five. They live just above the poverty level. And my dad going off in the Air Force, set our entire family down a road. It created opportunities for him. My mom was able to go on and get a bachelor's and a master's degree, and then ultimately, she was able to be the director of Catholic Charities, and so for Northwest Florida. So, that and has been an influence on my life, and it's made me who I am today.
Yeah. So you had said when we talked earlier, and you've already made a couple of comments that points to this, but you said, I don't believe in barriers. You said there's only problems to be solved. And so for the audience that's listening to this, whether it's a personal or professional wall that they might come up against, what advice would you give them as sort of this first internal step to take?
You know, I think it boils down to, if you look at psychology, you've got intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, right? And where does that, what's your locus of control? And to me, I don't think my environment shapes me. I think I shape my environment and create my own opportunities. And if there aren't opportunities right there in front of my face, by doing things, I'm going to make them happen. So what I tell people is that, no matter what your circumstance is, there's always a way to make things happen. What we tend to do as human beings is we put up excuses about why we can't do things. Everything has to be perfect before I can start.
I have to have all my
And
ducks in a row.
yeah, and you don't have to have all your ducks in a row. You just got to take one step forward. And if you take one step forward, you can take another and then another. And before you know it, that run, that step is a run. And then before you know it, you're going fast, right? And you're going to hit bumps in the road. You're going to slow down. But there's nothing that happens. And um, I've lost my mother. My father's lost two wives since then, one to cancer, one to Alzheimer's. My business partner lost his sister, lost his mother. We've seen tragedies, we've seen things happen, and what it is, and I've known people that have had very tragic things happen to them, but what they did was they didn't let those things define them. If they didn't let those things define them. They went and they took those, they learned from them and learned about how they could make their life better and how they could go forward.
Yeah. What is what is something that you wish you knew from day one? Now that you've had this incredible journey, I mean, you shared things with me like, um, during the .com days around 9/11, like navigating challenges in regards to bit wizards and persevering through that. And then you also shared about how you grew your business from 3 to 80 and that there were tough times. And there was even a time where you were waiting for customers to pay so that you could pay payroll.
Hmm.
And that you said you just grabbed yourself by your bootstraps and, even though there was stress and uncertainty, but it was really about mindset and strategy that pulled you through. So with this incredible journey that you've had throughout all of this, what is one thing that you wish you knew back then that you now know?
Well, I'll tell you, when I was little, I knew that there's no such thing as a permanent record. That's a bunch of crap. So you can put that aside. But
Yes, that's another podcast conversation for
but
sure.
I would say in business, you know, it's always harder than what you think it's going to be. right? Everybody hears about the overnight successes and hears about how great it is, but it's never as easy it is. And you don't see all of the things that people give up when they go and they run a business or they build something, and all the mentors and people that they work with to get to that point. But the one thing that I learned out of that was grit and perseverance. And that through grit and perseverance, and again, taking one step forward, I can get through anything. You mentioned, I remember, we had all of our credit cards charged up, and that's the entrepreneurial story. You've heard it before, but it's a reality. We weren't going to make payroll. And, Lewis and I just, we were sitting there stewing about it in the office. And finally, we just sat down and said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to get on the phone. We're going to call everybody, and we're going to let any of our creditors know that we're behind and that we're going to get them caught up and give them our assurances. And we're going to talk to those that haven't paid us and explain to them why it's important, do what we can. We took some pretty unorthodox loans that were at super high interest to help get us over the hump, but we paid everybody back. We did not pay any of our bills in the long run, and we were able to get through it. But the only way I was able to get through it is just decide that I was going to get through it, that we were going to make it through. And that's not to say that it wasn't hard. That's not to say that we didn't fight between the two of us. At that time,
Yeah.
I was a brand new dad. I had just gotten married. I got married in '07 when that first downturn happened, and we were going to have a child soon, and so that's a lot of stress, but it's manageable if you just don't look at it in totality. Your mind will take you in places that are dark. They tell you everything's going to fail, it's all going to fall apart, everybody's going to hate you.
We're actually programmed to do that rather than focusing on here's what's working, here's what's
Yep.
going well, here's what, right? We're programmed to think here's what's wrong, here's what's broken, here's what's not working, and to focus on that. It's really fascinating.
It is, and I, I don't know. I think that if you focus on the things that are going well, and I've had these pity parties. Lewis and I was kind of funny. We kind of joked around that I was Captain Kirk and he was Mr. Spock. But the funny thing that was always there when we were working on Bit Wizards before we started talking parents is that when one of us was down in the dumps, the other one was at some level, above, and we were able to pull each other, back up, from the bottom. God forbid that we ever both got down in the dumps at the same time. If we did, and I know we did a few times, the pity party didn't last long. It was finally, okay, what are you going to do to fix it? And how are we going to do it? And we took steps. And, some of those steps set us back. Some of them were
Okay.
bad
Interesting. Yep.
mistakes or not good
Yep.
mistakes, but they didn't kill us. And we were able to navigate it around. It was through that sheer force of will. And I think one of the things that we did well was over communicate. We were always honest in our business dealings. And so when we needed help from other people, or we told them that we were in trouble, we got a little bit of grace because we'd always extended grace before. And so I think those things added up, and those little things that you do um, buy you
I
something in the long run, I guess.
I totally so as a coach, and I consider myself a communication expert. I coach people a lot on communication, and I do find that people tend to more often than not under communicate versus over communicate, and then they think that they're burdening or that it's a waste of time to over communicate, and I find themselves getting themselves into trouble when they don't. So I'm glad that you brought that up and mentioned that.
Something
Yeah.
else I would tell you is find experts to help you. We hired a good attorney. We found a good banker that helped mentor us and show us how to manage a line of credit and some of those other things. We also did the work ourselves. I remember we went over to the University of West Florida and went to the Small Business Administration, and they had some basic classes on how to operate a business. You got to remember, you know, we're software engineers that are learning to run a business, right? So we kind of fumbled through this. How do you set up QuickBooks? What do you do? How do you manage this? What are the requirements? Um, but when you get those mentors, they will help you learn those things, and don't be afraid to ask for help. But by the same token, I've now gotten to the point now, and then this goes back to my personality. I tell my attorney, I tell my accountant, don't tell me what I can't do. Okay. I want to tell you the outcome
Love
that I'm
that.
trying to
Yes.
achieve, and then
Yes.
tell me how to do it legally and ethically. If I can do it legally and ethically, then I'm on board with it. We'll figure out how to do it. But this is the result that I want to achieve. Too many times, mentors are great, but also, ultimately, the buck stops here. If your business fails, it's on you, right?
Mm.
You know,
Yep.
they're not gonna, and so, I listened to them and I learned from them, but also I got to the point where I said, hey, this is what I'm trying to achieve. Tell me how to do it. How do I get it
Yep.
done legally and ethically?
Yep. So with that too, I want to make sure that you have just a few minutes to also share about what you're up to these days. And you said that you acknowledged all the people that we touch in our lives and the impact that we have, and that what you're doing right now, especially with the talking parents, right?
Hmm.
Um, I mean, what was unexpected in that for you? I wish we had more time for you to share the journey of how that got created, but yeah.
Well, I think back to going to your people question. When Lewis and I look back on the time that we've been with Bit Wizards and then of course now with Talking Parents, um, you never know. You do a marketing event, you don't know who you touch then. You don't know if 6 months down the road that person is going to be in a position where they might be able to help you or might refer a piece of business to you. Um, you don't know, when you have employees, how you treat them, what you do, the choices that you make. It may not be what, an attorney or an HR person does, but if you do the right thing and do right by that person, if we fire somebody, I never leave them without some runway, right? We always do it. It's just who we are. Those things over time, those things pay dividends. And I think it's the right way to operate. And I've looked back and I see all the people in the company that we have, people that have gotten married, people that have grown their careers. We've had somebody, that became a Microsoft MVP here and then went on to go work for Microsoft at one of the top levels. The families that have grown, people that started that were single with us. The first guy we hired, John Jackson, is still with us, 26 years later.
Mm.
He's now married and has his own son and has made his life. And, all these different people that we've helped go to school. One of the things that we have as a benefit is that we send people to school and we send them to training, and people have changed their careers and changed their lives. So when you do this, it's not just a journey for yourself. It's a journey where you're going to impact a lot of other people. You're going to be able to impact people out in your community. You're going to be able to impact the people that work for you. You're going to impact your customers. And, now, Lewis and I, it's very important to us that we give back to our community. So, we created a foundation called Be the Magic Foundation, and we do things where we support people with special needs, and we support animal welfare. And one of our big areas is education and children. So we sponsor a lot of sports teams and sponsor STEM academies and things like that. These are investments that because of our success, we're able to give back to our community. And, all of the people that work for us live and work in our local community here. So that's why it's super important to us.
Oh, I love that you just shared about the STEM Academy, because I have a friend who is writing children's books related to that. So I may want to connect you with her. But so to finish, to wrap up, you strike me as somebody who appreciates and that the constant evolvement of who we are as living souls, as living beings. And what is something that you are working on today for yourself, whether it's personally or professionally?
Well, one of our core values at BitWizards is be a lifelong learner. And
Mm.
one of our
Okay.
core values at Talking Parents is grow and evolve. And, right now, these days, I've got a 15-year-old and I've got a 16-year-old, and I'm all about trying to be a great dad. I'm also trying to grow and evolve as a CEO and owner of a consumer subscription business and a SaaS business. There are things that I didn't know about running that type of business, because before with BitWizards, we're trading dollars for hours. It's a professional services business, whereas this is a subscription and a recurring revenue model. So, I've got a lot of growing and a lot of things to do. And so I'm constantly learning, constantly doing new things. And it's just part of who I am. And from that, it allows me to get better, a little bit better. I tell my daughter all the time, she's a softball catcher. I said, 1% better every day,
1%.
1% better.
Love that. Yeah. Even just 1% can make such a huge difference. I sometimes tell a metaphor of golfing and how when a club hits a ball, even if you just turn it by 1/8 of an inch, when it smacks that ball, it's going to go, hundreds of feet in a completely different direction. So even just 1% can make such a huge difference.
It can.
Beautiful. Well, Vince, thank you so much for your time today. I so appreciate you being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking me.
Absolutely. And who knows, maybe we'll have you back on to expand a little bit on some of your other stories, and then to also see what else you're up to with the Talking Parents, because I think that service in and of itself is amazing, what it's doing for divorced parents. Yeah.
Well, if I could just make one more quick point,
Yeah.
it's interesting how you and I became connected, because you connected with one of my classmates from Notre Dame, who's also a military veteran. And through that, he made the introduction to you and I. And you never know, never did I, in my wildest dreams, believe that I was going to be doing a podcast with you today to talk about this journey. But, because of that connection, that's how we came together. And that's how, little things that we do, people that we meet in our life, it's like a river, and these little eddies and currents that come along, you never know when they're going to come back and have two people meet, two different parts of the river.
100%. Yeah. I'm grateful for that introduction. Absolutely. Perfect. Well, thank you once again. And to the audience that's watching, I hope you took something inspirational and valuable away from this today too. So on that note, we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. And if you got value from this episode, subscribe, give it a thumbs up, and comments are always appreciated. And if you're done trying to figure it out on your own, I work with leaders and entrepreneurs who are ready to leap forward and go all in. Connect with me on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Instagram. See you next time.